All right, so let's get started then. Yeah, thanks, Shawn, for agreeing to do this and kind of sharing your experience, writing your book. Um, and I can share a little bit like how I came across, you and I'm like knowing what you're doing. So I was like one day just browsing on Twitter, and then I think I saw someone like posting an article about learning publicly, and I checked out your article and then checked out your blog. Like I was very, very impressed. And also like I think it struck a really strong chord with me in terms of like how I can expedite my learning and also share with others how I can, like how help people understand how I'm going through those troubles and then share that learning with others. So yeah, that's how I got to know you through your articles and also found out about like you're writing a book right now.
I mean, the book is done, um, but yeah, I mean, that was I'm I do focus on other things as well, like more JavaScript, React's, you know, serverless stuff.
Mm,
But the non-technical stuff, unfortunately, has become my brand,
mm,
for better or for worse. And it's something that I guess people like to read about more. And whatever for whatever reason, that essay really struck a chord. I wrote that actually. So I did a boot camp
mm.
when I changed careers. I used to be in finance.
Time like for people who don't know you that well, like maybe do a quick introduction so people can know who you are and
Yeah,
what your background is. Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah. So I used to do finance, like investment banking, and hedge funds, and basically burned out because it was very high stress. So when I was about 30, 31, I basically decided to start from scratch and started to learn to code. Uh, Basically spent all of 2017 doing that. So the first half was doing free code camp, on nights and weekends, and then when finishing it, realizing that like if I wanted to be serious about this, I had to quit my job and go full time. So that's what I did, and then I went into a boot camp and finished it in 2017. And then right out of boot camp, joined Two Sigma. Two Sigma is a New York fintech hedge fund thing. I joined. I did not join the quant arm. I joined the insurance subsidiary inside of Two Sigma. That turned out to not be such a good job, so I left and joined Netlify. Netlify is a site hosting company. You probably know Netlify. Um, and then from Netlify, just joined AWS last month. So that's kind of my trajectory so far. And basically, yeah, actually it was kind of 2 years ago, um, when kind of I was going back to my boot camp and trying to do like a graduation speech, like those like commencement speech, like very corny, but just like, I was just thinking about like what is the most succinct, like I study a lot of people who are successful in our industry, and like what is the one thing that all of them have in common. And then thinking about my own activities so far, which I wasn't like that prolific at the time, but I was like, what is like the 80-20, like you do this and you get at like disproportionate results. And that became the whole learning public idea. um, I definitely am not the originator of this idea. I myself got it from Kelsey Hightower, who is sort of Mr. Kubernetes, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. And I've traced it as far back as NASA in 2010, when they share knowledge internally within their company. They within the organization, they actually called it Learning Public. Um, and I found like their documents from 2010 talking about that. So I'm sure this idea goes far back beyond that. So I'm just helping to popularize it, and it's not mine. It's just I'm helping this to spread the word, because it definitely helped me a lot. It helps me,
Mhm.
you know, uh, get in touch with people like you who I don't know, but like now, like you had an impression of me just from reading my blog, right? Which is I think something that you cannot really pay for, and it just scales infinitely. So
Mm,
it's very nice.
yeah. Yeah, thank you. Like the article was definitely very, I think it was very motivational. It definitely helped me feel that I have to change the way that I learn. And one thing that really stuck with me was that most people, when they do their learnings, right, like they are very like secluded, right? They do their learning in the dark, and then they figure something out, and then there's not as much of sharing, right? There's a lot of like consuming. Like the way I think about consuming is that like a lot of people, they consume privately or they learn privately, and then they don't share whatever they have learned. It's only a very small number of people who actually go out there and go like share publicly the things that they have gone through, their adventures, either they succeeded or they failed. And your article really helped me and also motivated me to share more of the things I'm going through in my career as a software engineer. So yeah, thank you. Now, one thing you mentioned really interesting there is like in your career, right? Like you moved and you decided, was it like one day, like you just decided you want to move into software engineering, or?
I basically spent a year thinking about it. So the fuller story behind that is I knew I definitely burned out of finance, and then I was trying to think about what was next. So what I did was I took a non-technical PM job at a sort of fintech startup, and that only lasted a year. But during that year, I was basically dipping my toe in the water of like, can I make it in tech, or do I enjoy tech? And I realized that as a PM, I was kind of blocked by developers' productivity. And I realized that if I was going to do anything, especially entrepreneurial in the future, I needed to code myself. So then the final 6 months of that job, I was is it was always very like sort of risk averse, like
Hold on real quick, Shawn. Like the
code
network
on
is dropping
nights
a
and
little
weekends,
bit.
like do free code camp on nights and weekends and try to.
Cool. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So you were saying that, yeah, you turned into a PM role and you decided that you need to be more technical, you needed to be coding.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's always a slow progression, right? Like it basically I took 6 months steps in the direction of being an engineer, but I didn't have one day in which I decided that I would just go cold turkey. I think the final piece of it was finishing free code camp and then still feeling not ready to apply for jobs as an engineer. So I did as much as I could and learning, on the side. And I still felt like I didn't really know JavaScript that well. I didn't really know web development that well. So the conclusion was I had to quit my job and go through a boot camp for real and really cover my fundamentals and then apply for a job. So that's exactly what I did, and it happened to work out. But yeah, that was probably the biggest leap of faith. Like, go from having income to no income, still living in New York City, which is expensive, and and hope that going through a boot camp will and you come out, you know, land safely on the other side. So I think that was probably like the biggest jump, but I had proof points from like the 6 months and before that.
mm, do you have any plan, like a backup plan for before making that jump? Like were you saving up
Yeah,
money?
I
Were you
could
doing things? Yeah.
I could always go back to finance. So I don't know if you know the difference between buy side and sell side in finance.
Mm,
Okay,
not very
so
clear.
I was on the buy side, which buy side is very high stress because you're basically making bets and trades all the time, and you can swing up and down by a few million every day. Um, Sell side is easier because you're taking less risk, and that's where I used to be. So I had a standing offer from my old bank. If I ever wanted to go back to them, they would take me back. So that is, if worse comes to worse, like I can always go back there. The pay would be quite low, but um, it would be a job. So I knew that was a safety net I could always fall back on.
I see. And do you feel like you have to save up, X number of months of savings before you could safely make that switch to like going through that boot camp?
I definitely did. I think because the boot camp is about 15 to 17,000 upfront. There are payment options where you can, sell your future income and all that. But I just paid it upfront. It happened that I was trading stocks on the side, and that year I was having a good year. So that also helped as well, because I paid it early out of stock trading.
I see.
So yeah, but I mean, it is a hurdle for some people who don't have that amount of savings. So for them, they will have to just rely on free resources, or get some sort of scholarship, or however way they can do it. Income share is like the main tool right now, but that also has downsides with they charge more for the risk.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't really have strong advice on that. I just pay it out of my own savings basically.
I see. So out of, you've gone through boot camp, I imagine that's several months of work, like 6 months you were saying, right?
Basically 3 months inside the boot
3 months.
camp, and then outside of it, just job searching, and then interviewing and all that. Yeah.
I see. So how did, like typically I would imagine if you have some experience in like finance and then you're going through a boot camp, you want to find something that's very close to an area where you have had domain experience. I think you said that you went into like Netlify, which is completely different from finance. How do you kind of make that switch? Like, what was that like?
No, so I had a job between that, right? Between my bootcamp and the first job I had was a Two Sigma. Two Sigma was a
Oh,
finance.
right. Yeah, fine. Yep. Sorry. Yeah,
Uh,
two Sigma.
so there I became, a full-fledged like React and TypeScript developer. And then once you're a React and TypeScript developer, you can market yourself more generally. So
I see. Was there a reason that you go to like Two Sigma? Was it because you've had that domain experience or?
honestly, they just paid the best. So I mean, in retrospect, they paid the best because they didn't know what they were doing. So I didn't enjoy it there because we had nothing to do. So I wasn't growing at all. But yeah, I mean, the story was nice to tell during the interview, that like, hey, I have prior finance experience, I have a CFA. How it's rare to have a developer that also has finance background. Of course, that's what you say during the interview, but then when you actually land on the job, they don't actually use any of that. So it was just a story to tell.
I see. And how did you decide to like move into Netlify, which is, like a completely different domain?
Yeah, I think that was just a function of honestly, the CEO reached out to me. This was literally like 1 week after I wrote the Learning in Public essay. Yeah, he reached out. And at the point in time, I had done a few talks on React. I published my site on Netlify, and I was just very excited about how easy this made it seem. Like, I had messed around with like DigitalOcean and EC2, like just followed a bunch of scripts to get my site deployed. But Netlify was the first service that like is really made for front-end developers to get productive. And I always, I want, like, when you do something, you want to publish it and deploy it onto the web. And so many tutorials always leave you at a local host, and it's really super annoying. So so I was very excited about Netlify, and also I think the other thing I was pretty keen on was that it was a remote job, which would be my first ever remote job, and I was pretty excited about that because I didn't like going to the office. I don't like the commute, and I think I would be more efficient. For example, I like to work at night. So if I am given the flexibility of organizing my day, and I'm just measured on my outputs instead of clocking in regular hours, then I felt more productive. And yeah, it turned out to be that case. So that's a lot of why I was excited.
I see. And I think it's also very interesting now that you mentioned you prefer the way that you work. And I was kind of going through your blog again several days ago, and I realized that you had this README that you posted on like GitHub, right? To help people, I think, So that was very interesting to me. Like, could you talk a little bit more about like why do you decide to post like a README on your GitHub, and what was the intention behind that?
So that's an idea I copied from Michael Lopp, who is Slack's VP of Eng. So he has this idea of manager readmes, and it's the whole thing of people take a long time to get to know each other, and there's a lot of repeating yourself again and again. So if you just send people your README, then they can just read that, and then you can skip past all the boring standard stuff and get to the real stuff. And I think the more things you can do asynchronously, the better for everyone concerned. And READMEs are good for that. Like if you can document your code, you might as well document your work style. It's like kind of like your work API, right? Like how you interface with the rest of the company and your coworkers. You should document that if you you know. And most people it goes undocumented, so that seems like a bug. I definitely, so if you read the README, you saw that I definitely skewed towards being honest about my flaws, and I think that's good because it shows that I have nothing to hide. Like these are just straight up what people say I need to work on, and I think instead of hiding it, if I'm you know, if I acknowledge it upfront and I share that this is a weakness that I know I have, people can work with me on that, and they can say like, hey, I know you've like said that you want to get better on this. You're doing this again. It's a bad habit. Please stop. That's much better than like they keep it to themselves, you know.
Right.
And then I won't improve. So I think the underlying philosophy is that if I don't have a big ego and I'm willing to be told that I'm wrong, I can be improved, then I just invite a lot more teachers and a lot more feedback than if I just like shut it off and keep it to myself. So yeah, I don't think, this kind of thing, I don't preach it on anyone. I never tell anyone to do a personal README. But just for myself, I think it's been a good experiment, and yeah, some other people have adopted it, and I think it's really cool. Like when I joined Amazon, my manager just sent my README to the entire organization.
Oh wow.
And yeah, people really really responded very well. Like it's this kind of thing, like how there's some companies where they disclose the entire salary of everyone in the company, and it's just this thing where we all know it's like a game theory thing. Like we all know it's beneficial if we just talked about it more openly, but the social norm is to not talk about it, so nobody does because it would be rude. But if you just broke the social norm, then you start to have more deeper conversations, because you now are allowed to, like you've already broken the thing that you're not supposed to say. So so I like getting past that because there's so much superficiality in life, and I'm bored by that.
I see. Yeah, I definitely I agree as well. Like bringing more transparency, it helps break down that social ice, so to speak, right, between people. And there's a lot of context building of knowing each other, especially when you're joining a new team or whenever you kind of, when you're putting yourself out there, like on Twitter, for example, and people only see the articles that you write, but they don't really know who you are. I think having that README there really helps people, like for me, for example, like knowing a little bit more about yourself, learning about what you appreciate in your life, and also seeing that transparency in the things that you do. So you're like walking the talk, right? Um, and what was your experience like? After you started sharing this, like how are people responding to it? Do you have people reaching out to you from like Twitter and saying like, "Hey, I really know you," things like that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm.
Sometimes it can get a bit too much. There's some very weird people online, but you just ignore them. It's fine. I don't owe them anything. You know what I mean? Like, I choose whether or not I want to engage. And if you don't get a response, don't be mad at me because, I do talk to a lot of people, and I don't owe you anything, right? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
It's I also participate to better myself and to grow my own network, and I'm not there to connect with everybody, so I'm fine. I'm kind of fine with that. But yeah, I mean, so far the trade-offs have been overwhelmingly positive compared to the downsides. So that's
Mm,
nice to have.
I see. And what was the outcome of, your manager sharing your README throughout the org? Did people reach out to you and talk about that?
Yeah, some. Yeah. I mean, it was just more like a, like people feel like they know me better, and I think it's basically like shortcutting that initial like 1 to 2 months of like, trying to get to know you, because they can just read me. And they do, because like, this is such an unusual thing that at first you open it and you're like, what the hell is this? And then you're like, oh, this is like real talk. And then you just read the whole thing, and that's really nice.
Mhm. Yeah, the first time when I read it, it reminded me of, usually when you join a new team, for example, your manager asks you to send a self-intro
That's
throughout
what,
the
yeah,
team.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then you
Um,
come up with some really boring bullshit that's like, oh, I went to university here, I like had this prior job, I like long walks on the beach, I like movies and TV,
right.
really boring shit. So
Hmm.
let's just skip past all that, right?
Hmm. Yeah. And I like that as well, like because your README goes into much more detail. It's not just like, oh, you're putting together two or three talking points so that people kind of like know who you are. But this is like, okay, this is everything about me, like the working style. This is the times that I like scheduling meetings. Like, here's what I don't like. Here's what the things that I like. And it gives people that sense of novelty as well, right? Because you don't usually get people joining your team who are that transparent and that willing to share their personal, even like weaknesses, right? Like, I don't see a lot of people sharing those things publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I think that's like a good segue into the book that you're writing, right? So maybe like give a quick intro about like what motivated the book and why you're writing in that.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, it was I had free time between jobs, and 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 I basically Amazon. So I was waiting for my job at Amazon. It got delayed because of the virus issues. So I essentially was looking at 2 months unemployed. Um, and I was like, what can I do during that 2 months? I spent like the first like 2 weeks just like, playing games and stuff, but I wanted to do something more productive. So I was like, okay, let's make my first money on the internet. I just like pre-sold. I put up a blank PDF and I pre-sold my writing. I was like, I'm gonna write something about careers, like just like career advice, like basically take the learning public essay and then just like multiply by whatever. Um, and then uh, I that single day I sold an empty PDF for $4,000, which is sounds good until you're like, shit, I owe people now something of quality. Um, and then you start writing. And the original goal was to write for 2 weeks and then just publish whatever I had for 2 weeks. 2 months later, I was still writing. And and so it kind of balloons into everything I think that most developers don't think about when they think about their careers. And so there's a lot of advice on how to like on technical interviews. Like there's every month I see a new book on like crack the coding interview and like I don't know, like there's a lot of like algorithms, data structures, and all that. But then if you study, for example, career ladders, so I have almost like a list or a database of every public engineering career ladder. So everything from Artsy to Financial Times to Spotify to um, Rent the Runway, whatever. Like there's a whole bunch of career ladders that have been publicly published. And if you study all of them, coding is actually usually 25% of the overall evaluation metric, like your technical competence. Everything else is like communication, business impact, influence in the organization. None of this is coding, man. Right? So in fact, so the realization is really that the coding is actually the easiest part of the coding career. And as much as books like to, because like developers like to do what they know, which is code. They like to read about what they know, and they would like to get better in that domain because there's an objective truth. It's much harder to talk about the 75% of the job that is not objective. And it's and so I was basically trying to tackle that because I don't see that talked about enough. And the way I decided, I ended up approaching it was basically principles. So stuff that you always have on with you, like in the absence of any other information, this is the default behavior that you should be doing. So that's principles. And then we talk about strategy, like learning strategy, like picking what to learn, picking what to specialize in. Career strategy, which is basically how to climb up career ladders and avoid being a cost center, like profit center, cost center. And then tech strategy, how your software, how people make money from your software, like how your software sort of is influenced by broader business and business models and tech megatrends. So that's the strategy section, basically one-off big decisions. And then the final bit is tactics. Tactics are like repeatable, reusable small things like negotiation, marketing yourself. Twitter is a tactic, like being good on Twitter. I think that's a networking skill. Yeah, stuff like that. So I basically broke that up into 3 sections, and then the final section that I did not plan on writing this, but it just happened that I wrote 100 pages on this, was career guides. So basically guiding people from junior engineer to senior engineer, and then some some transitions in between, like before that and then after that. So there's this section that people really like, which is comparing juniors versus seniors, and then how people can grow on quite a few dimensions. I think like 30 or something like that. And people that has quite resonated with people on leveling people up. So in terms of the target audience, I would say, especially because like I'm on the senior developer spectrum myself, it's meant for juniors to become seniors. And if you're senior, you get something out of it, that's great. But it's definitely targeted at the leveling people up side of the developer audience.
I see. So if I were to kind of summarize, right, like what you just said there is that like this book is a great resource for junior engineers who are looking to up level themselves and learn that, not only the coding side of things, which is what they're expected to perform, but how they can up level themselves in terms of communication, hiring, influencing the organization, right?
Yeah.
And like all these 75% of the things that no one really talks about in the industry. Is that like the right summary there?
You talk about it, but there's just no books on it. No one's written it down. You just like learn it somehow by like talking to people and like figuring it out over time. So I have this chart which is like explicit knowledge versus tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is all the things that have been written down, right? Your tutorials, your like, tutorials and books and what have you. And then explicit knowledge is stuff that you learn on the job. Some part of it just cannot be written down. Like you just have to live through it. So too bad, you're gonna have to go through that on your own. But some other parts are just things that have not been written down yet. So the goal of the book is to advance the boundary of tacit knowledge a little bit further down, to write down the things that haven't been written down yet. So for example, like I'm pretty sure that no developer education, no CS degree, no bootcamp talks to you about the business models of tech. Like what is the difference between an agency and a SaaS and advertising business model versus a platform versus a aggregator, like what's a horizontal versus vertical business, like why does that matter to you, stuff like that. Like these are very standard things for product managers and founders and CEOs. um, but you're downstream of that, and that actually affects a lot of what you do. Like you can almost predict your next feature request because it's just in line with the business strategy and overall directions. So if you can predict that, you can start to architect for that in your code, right? Like okay, in future we're going to have to expand this way, so we might as well start, leaving holes in our code for future work in that direction. um, or you can start you can start strategically positioning yourself internally within your company to pick projects that you think will actually do well based on your company strategy, right? So in internally within your company, you want to position yourself on successful projects and not be staffed on projects that will fail. I have done that. And yeah, I mean that's just like your code needs to matter, and your code doesn't have independent value. Your code needs to be applied usefully to some economic or business problem for it to actually have value and to be worth talking about in your next job, or in your promotion or whatever. And yeah, it's a very sort of multidisciplinary thing, which makes it super hard to write about. But I try to tackle it in the sense of like, I guess I have a unique background, especially on the business impact side, because I come from a finance, um, background. But that's only like that's the strategy piece. But then I also want to give that idea of like sometimes you work on a strategy level, sometimes you work on a tactics level, sometimes you work on a principles level. And you should have this sort of preference stack of like, if you're not if like if there's a specific tactical situation, then apply the tactics. If not, then like maybe there's some strategy that you're really working on. In the absence of strategy, maybe you just default to some overriding principles that help you decide in whatever situation you're in. So so then the challenge becomes like, who am I to give you principles and strategy? Like and the way I sort of make peace with that is basically by saying that these are mine, these are my principles, I wrote them down, I'm sharing them with you, and it's up to you whether you want to take them or not. These are just ideas, and it's like a buffet. Like take what you want, leave whatever you don't want. But the central premise is that you should have principles, and you should know what they are. You should refine them over time. When you make mistakes, you should try not to repeat them. When you do things that work enormously well for you, you should try to understand the drivers of that success, and you should try to repeat those again. And those eventually become your principles. And the more you sort of refine the process, the more you're sort of building your, what I call the operating system of what you do, like who you are as a developer. So this is a very like fuzzy topic, right? I haven't talked about numbers. Like I think it's easier to sell books if you can say things like, okay, go from junior to senior in 2 years, and like and like this is the
Right.
ROI of this course.
Yeah.
I don't do that because that's a very snake oil type of thing. I just want to engage on the level of ideas and say that like, if you like, I always preach the idea of systems over goals, right? Goals are things which you can set, but you don't really have control over. Like it's always, there's so many external factors, and even once you reach the goal, once you set a goal, you actually don't know how to get there. Like, setting the goal itself doesn't tell you how to get there, whereas having a good system sets you in the right direction, and actually gives you a plan for actually getting there. So it's very practical in that focus, and doesn't give you a concrete goal as much as just like, these are good directions to go in, and just kind of work on that and continuously improve yourself every day. That's the only thing you can ask for. Like if you set a goal and you miss, you fail it, you're sad. If you reach the goal, you're happy for a while, and then you're kind of like, what's next? It's just not a very interesting way to run your career. So I'm more interested in things that I can work on every day and compound over like 40 years. And like that will be that's something where like, you know, I don't have this illusion of control. Like, and there's so much in life that will just come out of nowhere and just randomly throw your plans off, like this year.
Mhm.
But if you have a good system of like, these are the principles that guide me, um, they'll sort of help you out in throughout, like no matter what situation.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Sean. That was really great. And I want to be, respectful of your time because we only had this scheduled for like 30
Yeah.
minutes. Um,
Sorry, I rambled quite a bit.
no, it was great. Like thanks for sharing. And I think, for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people who are kind of like watch this later on, I've learned a lot of things. One thing is like learning about yourself, your background, how you came about, and how did you decide to go into, boot camp, and then finally going to like tech, right? Working at Amazon now. And number two, about how you came up with this idea of like learning in public and how that has helped a lot of people like myself. That's changed the way that they see how they learn and how they can contribute to others. I've also learned a lot about, putting up a README, breaking down that transparency that a lot of people don't really see, like learning about you really quickly and get past all that, you know, um, superficiality, right? Of getting to know someone. And also your book. I'm very, very excited. I haven't gotten your book yet, but I'm gonna get it like after this.
Oh yeah,
And
I'll hook you
yeah.
up.
All right. Yeah, so before we kind of end this, is there anything that you want to, kind of share or like any advice that you have for people who's watching
I
this?
think so. Most people, when they start this, they are very excited and motivated and interested, and then they'll tag me on Twitter and they'll be like, "Look, I'm learning in public," and I say that's great, and then I don't hear from them ever again, um, and that's because of this fundamental misattribution of motivation versus discipline. This is not about motivation, right? Even though it's very motivational, I understand, and I get people who are so inspired by it, but they fail to change their life because they don't follow through. The reason they don't follow through is because they expect external rewards, because we're conditioned to uh, to respond to external rewards, right? Like, we only do things for grades, we only do things for money, we only do things for, respect from peers. We don't do things for ourselves. So I always tell people that intrinsic motivation is the core. It must be at the core of what you do. Otherwise, it will not last, because that's everything else is not authentic to you. You're just like looking for approval from me, from your peers, from your parents. I don't care. Um, None of that matters. You have to make yourself happy. You have to you have your own idea of what growth is, and pursue that. And if your process can survive being ignored, then you can work on it indefinitely. Typically, it takes a few months of like no one really reading what you do. I probably took about a year of blogging, and no one really read what I did. Doesn't matter, because eventually you'll find your audience, you'll find your niche, and people will be like, "Holy shit, where did this guy come from?" And they don't really think about the years of quiet that just like, you gotta slog it out, find your style, experiment with like what topics you're really interested in. um, but yeah, like I definitely preach intrinsic over extrinsic motivation.
Got it. Thank you. That was great advice. I think a lot of people struggle with that, and that's a very, very valid, very strong advice there. All right. Okay. Thanks, Sean. It was great
Thank
having
you.
you, and it was great chatting and kind of learning a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. See ya. Thanks.